Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
IVF providers around the state have already paused treatments out of fear that their doctors and patients could be punished.
Fears over access to in vitro fertilization after a recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling threatens the practice. And early voting is underway in Illinois as former President Trump survives a ballot challenge. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more. And now to some of today's top stories. Jury deliberations are underway in the killing of Chicago police officer Ella French. Imonte Morgan is facing murder and attempted murder charges for the 2021 shooting that left French dead and her partner critically wounded. Jurors were shown graphic body camera footage that showed French's final moments. The footage has not been released publicly, and there's more of this story on our website. Homicides are on the decline in Chicago, according to monthly reports from the Chicago Police Department. CPD says citywide there were 31 homicides in February. That's down 20% from last February. And overall, homicides are the lowest since 2019, dropping nearly 21% year to date. Police also say their homicide clearance rate is at its highest rate since 2015 at more than 79%. And be sure to join us on Monday evening for WTTW News, A Safer City, where we'll devote the entire program to issues of public and community safety. The Chicago Teachers Union is gearing up to renegotiate its collective bargaining agreement with the city of Chicago this year. President Stacey Davis Gates gave a preview during today's City Club of Chicago lunch, and she warns her membership expects this contract to be about transformation, and it will cost money.
The economics are going to be something that we are going to have to go back and forth about with all the public leaders in this space. As you know, the evidence-based funding model is one of the best models in the nation, quite frankly, and it doesn't have enough revenue going into that model. So it's a beautiful vehicle that only has less than a half a tank of gas. And so we're going to need to fill that gas tank up so we can drive that beautiful car all around.
The nearly 1,000-member House of Delegates is voting on its contract proposal tomorrow evening. Davis Gates wouldn't share the specifics of that proposal other than a living wage for some of the union's lowest-paid members and adding arts and sports consistently across schools. The current contract expires this summer. The last contract was completed after CTU members went on strike for 11 days in 2019. Future nurses will have the opportunity to train and learn through a new partnership between UChicago Medicine and City Colleges of Chicago. The deal, which also involves the University of Chicago, will mean building 2 new facilities in Washington Park to create the UChicago Medicine Clinical Labs and the Malcolm X College Learning Center. The city and the university say the facilities would mean hundreds of jobs as well as support for the future cancer pavilion, while also serving hundreds of students. Both facilities are expected to break ground in 2025 and open during the 26-27 academic year. In addition, City Colleges plans to establish a full nursing pathway at Kennedy King College in Inglewood, but operated by Malcolm X College. Up next, the science and ethics behind the debate over IVF. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jin and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors. Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Families across the country are in limbo as medical facilities are putting in vitro fertilization or IVF treatments on hold. It comes after last month's controversial Alabama Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos should be protected as children. The decision holds individuals liable for embryos that get destroyed, causing many providers to pause treatments out of fear of criminal charges. Joining us to discuss the battle over reproductive medicine in the U.S. are Dr. Erica Lowden, reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist at Kind Body; Lori Zoloth, professor of religious ethics at University of Chicago; Matthew Epinet, Executive Director of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity at Trinity International University. And joining us via Zoom, Rita Gitchell, Special Counsel to the nonprofit law firm, the Thomas More Society. Thanks to all four of you for joining us. Dr. Lowden, starting with you, please give us a brief explanation of what IVF is, how it works.
So in vitro fertilization, IVF, is a process for assisted reproductive technology where couples who are dealing with infertility, we can assist them. So it may be different diagnosis, tupile factor infertility, same-sex couples, diminished ovarian reserve, male factor. There's so many medical and health things that can cause this. So now the CDC has recognized this as a disease. It's not elective. So couples choose to have their families this way so that they can do in vitro fertilization, where we take them through a surgical procedure, get as many eggs as we can, fertilize those eggs with their partner sperm or donor sperm, and then watch those embryos grow in a culture system to an embryo blastocyst, which is usually day 5 to 7 after that egg retrieval surgery. At that point, now couples can choose to transfer directly. They can test their embryos with something called pre-implantation genetic testing to make sure they have the healthiest embryo, reduce miscarriage, and increase their success rates. So there's so many options that are out there, but that's what IVF is.
Very complicated, and obviously it's grown quite a bit with technology over the years. Matthew Epinet, though, your organization, you've got some concerns with the use of IVF as a way of creating a family. What are some of those concerns?
Yeah, well, as we know, when the sperm and egg unite, a new human person comes into being. And so it really is a question of how we treat those human persons, how we care for them. And that seems to be the main question at issue.
Rita Gitchell, what was your reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court decision?
I found it very interesting that there's a culture of life in Alabama. There was no dispute between the clinic and between the parties whose embryos were negligently destroyed that what was at stake was human life. And so that was not a matter of dispute. The dispute across the country is whether we treat the unborn and human embryos, whether in the body or out of the body, as people or as property. And we believe that humans deserve human rights at all stages of development.
Lori Zoloth, same question to you. What was your reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling?
This is a profoundly religious question. When life begins, when a human life begins, is a religious question that religious traditions, such as my own and my colleagues here, have been debating for thousands of years, right? And in fact, it's mentioned in Hebrew scripture that, in fact, when a woman is pregnant, the fetus that she's carrying, even then as a fetus, isn't a life, doesn't count as a life, isn't a human being. When human life begins is a religious question, not a political question. It's not even really fully a biological question. It's a complex theological claim. And when we say that a human being has rights, then we have to think about what our duties to that person might be. In Judaism and in Islam, in Hinduism and Buddhism, those duties begin when the child is born and becomes a member of the human community, not when it's created in a dish.
Dr. Lowden, what does a ruling like this mean for providers like yourself, reproductive endocrinologists, those who are in Alabama, but especially for families who depend on IVF as a way to grow their families?
It's very restrictive, so it's disheartening. People are losing hope because the whole point of IVF is to grow your family, expand it if you're dealing with infertility. So now we have restrictions where people are afraid to do it. And we see that happen in Alabama where clinics, universities with fertility treatment options shut down things. Patients in the middle of their cycles were not allowed to go on. So that puts you in a place where what do you do next? And then can you ship your embryos? Well, that's a big legal thing that you can't just say, yes, I'm going to transport my embryos to Illinois and do my transfer where it's legal. No, so it puts a lot of fear and anxiety, and it destroys the whole process of what the patients are trying to do. We believe that it's between the doctor and that patient. Our goal is not to create multiple embryos. We want the patient to have autonomy. We want them to be able to decide what's best for them and their future. And I agree with her that this is not a political thing. This is a very personal thing. And yes, we can debate about when human life starts, but if you look at Oxford Dictionary and biology textbook, an embryo is a rudimentary potential for development. It is not a person. It cannot survive out the body, so therefore it should not have the same rights as a child that's, or even a fetus for that matter.
And of course, it should be made clear that the process of IVF, not only can it be very invasive, but also very emotional. There's a lot riding on that process for those
emotionally,
families.
financially, physically, very toiling. And it's not for we explain this to patients, it's not a sprint. It's a marathon, because we do know that IVF cycle success rates national average at 35 is 50%. It's not 100%. PGTA increases the success rate slightly, but it could take multiple cycles of doing IVF. Yes, pre-implantation genetic testing, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. As you mentioned earlier.
Aneuploidy, because we're testing to see if the embryo is chromosomally normal so that they can have a healthy child, not one that
once implanted, your chances of having a healthy baby are higher
increased,
because you've gone through that process. Matthew, your organization believes that if IVF is used, it should not lead to the creation, of multiple embryos.
Well, there are really a range of opinions when it comes to evangelicals and IVF. So some would say that life should never be created in the lab. Others would say only create as many as you're going to transfer and use, and not freeze them. While others would be fine with freezing them for a time, but really wanting that original couple to go on and transfer those if at all possible. So there's a range of opinions, but again, coming back to caring well for the embryo, seeing them as human beings full of potential rather than potential human beings.
Rita Getchell, Alabama's ruling holds that individuals are accountable if something goes wrong. Should this be a punishable offense?
Well, if you ask any family who lost their embryos, whether in Ohio and the freezer failure there, should there be some remedy when the embryos are negligently destroyed? I think most people would say, yes, there should be a remedy. And since they're human beings, should they be allowed to have the remedy given to a human being? Can it be a jury question as to what should be awarded? Can we trust our juries to make the right decision? I think we can. But what strikes me is there's all this panic, and Louisiana has treated embryos as juridical persons since the get-go. So this isn't new. This isn't a first time embryos are treated as something other than property. So I'm surprised in a way at all of this because Louisiana has had these laws in place for decades.
It's actually interesting because in Hebrew scripture, they are treated as property. When they're lost, they're treated as, the fine for them is to be treated as property. They make a distinction in Hebrew scripture, in Exodus, between human property and the loss of a human life. It's a very clear distinction, one of the few actually in Hebrew scripture. So it hasn't been in dispute. What's wonderful about religion is how differently we approach this question. Mm-hmm. And that's why having a state and a court system and a particular judge in a particular jurisdiction make a determination that prohibits the free expression of religion, in this case as in others, is extraordinarily problematic.
Matthew, I was struck by the Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice's citing of the Bible in this opinion, declaring frozen embryos people. What place does religion have in a very personal decision like this?
Well, I think all of our personal decisions are driven by our deeply held beliefs, and often those come from religion. So in some ways, it was surprising that he was some of the things that he said in his opinion, but without a doubt, those are the kinds of things that inform all of our thinking when we think about issues of life and health and life and death. Very, very deep convictions.
Dr. Lowden, what are some of the medical ethics that you have to weigh in guiding couples through figuring out what to do? For example, if a couple is lucky enough to have multiple embryos, how do you help them? What are the ethics that you have to weigh in helping them decide what to do with them?
So the ethics involved that is considering first age, which is the single most prognostic factor about how successful those embryos are going to be. We know on an egg-by-egg basis about maybe 1 in 8 of those embryos are actually going to be a viable pregnancy. So we consider the patient's age, we consider how many children do they hope to have. And so if they have multiple embryos, then you talk about, odds. Every 3 embryos is actually 1 live birth because there's so many complexity processes that have to occur before that embryo can implant, can make it to actual fetus and get to a live birth, because just pregnancy does not mean a guarantee of a take-home baby in 9 months. So we look at those, and then if they have some religious or ethical things, guess what? There's so many things. You're done with your family building, there are 4 counselors. You do not have to discard your embryos. You can donate to science, which we can never clone you, but there's things you could do, like we test our incubators, pH, and when I say test, we put them in a normal environment environment we're going to do. If you really don't want to discard, you can actually do something in some clinics called compassionate transfer, where we take those embryos that you have remaining and we transfer them back into your uterus at a time where less likely to get pregnant, but you can take that back to nature, let your body resorb that. This happens every month when a woman ovulates, you don't get a pregnancy. It's actually 30% of pregnancies go undetected because they're lost very early. Those pregnancies, your body resorbs it. So there are things to accommodate what your views, your beliefs are, where you do not have to discard them. You can actually do other avenues to
there are
make
also
you
cases of other women, other people adopting
yes,
embryos.
You can adopt excess embryos.
Hopefully...
So like if you're done, one of my favorite companies here is called Snowflake. So they have a big donor group because there are patients who are waited till age decline, fertility is there, and it's not an option for them to have a viable child of their own. So they use donor embryos, and that's a great option.
Not an uncomplex situation. I want to thank the four of you for joining us. Dr. Erica Lowden, Lori Zoloff, Matthew Epinette, and Rita Getchell. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight team breaks down the latest in politics. Stay with us. The Illinois Senate passes a plan for a hybrid elected school board in Chicago. Meanwhile, early voting expands to all 50 of the city's wards on the same day that Donald Trump secures his name on the ballot. And where are we 5 years after the consent decree went into effect? Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon, Paris Schutz, and Amanda Vinicky from Springfield. Welcome back, team. So, Amanda, let's start with you first. Lawmakers are back in Springfield today. They've been dealing with some education issues, including Chicago's elected school board. The Senate, as we mentioned, passed a measure that would create a hybrid, which means half elected, half appointed school board in this year's general election. Many senators, though, voting for it begrudgingly. Tell us why, Amanda.
Yeah, you actually heard during the debate a lot of senators saying we have to pass this because there is a self-imposed deadline of April 1st to get the matter of what Chicago's elected, or at least half elected, school board will look like come later this year. But they were really frustrated by this because the Senate had previously passed a measure that would move to an all-elected board right away. Interestingly, of course, and this is something that a lot of senators and opponents keyed in on, that is something that the Chicago Teachers Union, which of course Mayor Brandon Johnson had been a leader of and a member of, had previously said they wanted all elected right away. He becomes mayor, changes their position. So you had opponents, including Alderman Villegas, saying that this is effectively a CTU PAC bill. Senators, however, said that, well, this is the version that the House had passed previously, at least something akin to it. And further, this is the measure that Mayor Johnson had wanted them to move forward. So it's not a completely done deal. The measure that the Senate took action on today, that still has to go back to the House chambers where I'm at now. But it seems as if that is what we are going to get. But really, like I said, Brandis, lots of frustration with this plan. Senators sort of adopting it, but really dragging their feet to do so.
So early voting opened in all of the city's 50 wards yesterday, despite there being some ballot controversies. So let's walk through a few of those. Paris, we found out yesterday Donald Trump will be on the Illinois ballot. Fill us in on yesterday's Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court ruling and how that's impacting voters in Illinois.
Well, the Supreme Court ruled that it's Congress that, in their opinion, must decide whether or not the presidential candidate does not qualify based upon the 14th Amendment. That is after Colorado's Supreme Court ruled that he was ineligible under the 14th Amendment. So Supreme Court says states shouldn't make that decision. Congress should make that decision. That means Illinois, which a Cook County Court judge had struck Trump off the ballot for similar reasons, He will be on the ballot. He was always going to be on the ballot, but now the votes will count. Officially, he is officially an eligible candidate in the race.
And what's been the reaction from, I believe there were 5 Illinois voters who filed in Illinois. Any word on what their reaction has been on yesterday's ruling?
Well, I think they're pretty frustrated because this Supreme Court decision I don't think was unanticipated, but it certainly sort of wasn't what they were hoping for. And it does leave this sort of question of whether an accused or, sort of charged insurrectionist can be on a federal ballot. And we're all sort of a little bit in limbo.
Heather, Eileen
It also
ONeal.
leaves open the question.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, guys. I was saying it also leaves open the question of whether Trump did engage in insurrection. That is something that the U.S. Supreme Court did not answer. I will add also that this is something that Governor Pritzker has said will help Trump, will help Democrats, that is, having Trump on the ballot will help members of his party. I'll add that I think that might be the case in Illinois. I'm not sure, however, that is the case in some of the states where there's a greater contest between Trump and Democrats' likely nominee as well, of course, President Biden, that this whole question and trying to get Trump off the ballot might have a greater impact in places like Colorado.
Okay, now let's get to the Cook County State's Attorney's race. Heather, Eileen ONeal Burke took to social media to make it clear who she's not related to, and I'm quoting here, that Burke. I think we all know which Burke she's talking about, but why is this important?
Well, she is not related to convicted former Alderman Ed Burke. Now, her married name is Burke. She's always gone by ONeal Burke, and the campaign of Clayton Harris III is perhaps leaning into that perhaps confusion, prompting her social media case. But that prompted me to take a deeper look at her record. She was endorsed in her Illinois appellate court bid by Ed Burke, who was the decades-long chair of the Cook County Judicial Slating Committee, and she and her husband gave about $1,700 to Burke's campaign war chests. So Burke had a huge impact on the Cook County judiciary, the statewide judiciary. ONeal Burke is no different, and whether that will sort of play a role in this closely fought election, I think, is yet to be seen.
And even though this is, sort of standard practice, as you mentioned, her opponent Clayton Harris says he's deeply concerned that she's apparently paid off Ed Burke in exchange for his endorsement.
So that might be overstating a little bit, but Ed Burke was convicted by a jury on 13 of 14 counts for engaging in routine and almost reflexive pay to play. And there was no doubt that you did not get slated if you did not sort of pony up. And I think that's what Clayton Harris is referring to. Now, it's important to note he's endorsed by Cook County Tony Preckwinkle, whose own bid for mayor back in 2019 was torpedoed by her connections to former Alderman Burke. So it is sort of the quintessential Chicago politics story of everybody being connected to everybody else. How it all plays out yet to be seen.
So Ed Burke is gone, but the same kind of crazy process of folks that are supposed to be independent arbiters, judges, they have to go to the Democratic politician and kiss the ring and ask for their endorsement. Both these candidates did ask for the Cook County Party endorsement. That endorsement went to Clayton Harris from the current president, Tony Preckwinkle. So the players are different, but the process is the same.
The game is pretty much the same. Heather, you also took a close look at how reforms are going in the Chicago Police Department 5 years after that consent decree was inked and went into effect. What did you find out?
Well, the city is only 6% fully compliance with this decree, which was supposed to be done. We were supposed to be out from under the consent decree by now. That, of course, did not happen. We're awaiting the next report from the independent monitoring team, which will come by the end of June, we expect. And they have promised to take a comprehensive look at the city's ability to comply with the consent decree and its efforts to comply with the reforms. Now, this has not been a priority for Mayor Brandon Johnson or his new top cop, Larry Snelling. They have focused far more time on crime reduction and sort of remaking the police department into an agency that holistically addresses law enforcement challenges, not reform. If you talk to police reform advocates, though, they'll tell you the two are inextricably linked.
Well, and the police department often defends itself, saying we're partially in compliance with far more than what which they are fully compliant. Paris, before we run out of time, some new stadium developments. Rumor has it that the Bears and the Sox might be teaming up.
Well, there was a report in the Sun-Times that quoted the owner of the property, Related Midwest, who owns that 78, where they want to build the Sox Stadium. It would be good for him if the Bears and the Sox teamed up. Anything to get that Sox Stadium built on that property, because it seems like right now lawmakers are not going to be receptive to Jerry Reinsdorf's billion-dollar ask. In fact, they're probably already revising that number downward. So if teaming up with the Bears makes that stadium in the 78 more of a possibility for this developer, then he's going to go out there and say, let's do this. But so far, neither team has confirmed that that's what they're talking about. And to be clear, it would be teaming up on financing two stadiums, that stadium and then perhaps a Bears football stadium south of the current one in the South Lot.
And thank you for the clarification, because I was afraid that we're going to have to play baseball and football in the same stadium at the same time.
Those were built in the 70s. They don't build those anymore.
All right, that's Spotlight Politics. Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, Paris Schutz. Thanks, gang. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. The state Senate passes a teachers union-backed hybrid plan for an elected Chicago school board, and a rise in congenital syphilis cases in Chicago. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.